Ulysses by James Joyce is a 1922 novel, and it is quite the sizable novel, but it's actually not as bad as you'd think, or at least as I expected. Just as far as like page number wise, because I think people are just kind of it's more so describing the experience of reading Joyce. I don't think it's actually I mean, it could be something like a series of short stories, kind of in the sense of like Dubliners, and that was pretty easy to digest, but it was also kind of difficult in the sense of just the subject matter and all these different characters representing different kind of points in time, sort of chronologies through kind of life to death or birth to elderly. So this is very, like, it's packed, but it's not that size-wise. Maybe just because I've tried more so in the recent years. I mean, it's not like that much bigger than, like, say, the Brothers Karamazov, and it's probably equal in size to about like Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. It's really not that bad. I mean, it took me once I got the hold of the narrative and everything. I did try sometime in my early 20s. I tried like my first foray into reading Ulysses, and I didn't. It was the Audible version, and I thought, I was like, okay, well, it's the narrator was aptly Irish and got all like the pronunciations like on. Well, I mean, obviously I'm not from there, so I'm not too privy to that. But it was it wasn't the narrator. It was just that my train of thought, like I lost that train of thought. That was very. It takes time, I think, and I think for me, it's like the best way is to digest it like that. That's not to say all books, because there are books that are different. Like there are books that I definitely do like listening to audible, and actually are like comforting in a weird way. Some of Murakami's books are like that, but yeah. So the Ulysses is obviously was published on Joyce's 40th birthday, I believe, and he was born in 1822, obviously, and there's a lot of it that he had a strange relationship with Ireland. Like he was born in Dublin, I believe, like heart of Ireland, which as I visited, which kind of prompted me to take up more of an interest in Joyce after visiting like Dublin and Trinity College, and just seeing kind of it almost seems like Ireland is like always rainy, but maybe it's just because when I went there in like November, I think in like 2019, it was like very, very rainy, so it was like very it kind of set the mood for how I kind of view Ireland. And it was only a week, so it's not like I'm trying to act like I know. There's so much more you can glean from the country, just like going, just from Ireland alone. Not to mention the British Isles and all the different, the depth of different things you can experience and visit and learn from them. But yeah, I think that kind of, I heard of the Bloomsday thing of people going around on, I don't know if it's the day that's mentioned in the book or if it's like the day it was published. In that day, I think Bloomsday is like somewhere in June, I think. I'm not sure if June or July sometime. People recreate the kind of circumambulatory kind of little peregrinations that the characters take, like Stephen Dalis or Leopold Bloom or Buck Mulligan. Like they all go around kind of Molly Bloom too. And it's, yeah, that would be cool. Something I'd like to experience one of these days. But anyway, so that's probably enough background information on the book. Joyce sets us off right off the bat. It takes place one day in the life of three, a cast of different characters, but it focuses on kind of, I think, 3 to 4 people in, I think right off the bat it introduces us to Stephen Daedalus, who's like an academic intellectual, who also is one of the characters in A Portrait of the Artist of the Young Man, which is kind of a half kind of semi-autobiographical look into Joyce's life, especially with a kind of austere kind of Irish Catholicism that he grew up with, hence the love-hate relationship, and kind of led him into kind of coming into his own and like a very formative years that led him to to basically negate, not to completely, he had a soft spot for like the hard, the poor people, obviously, like in Dubliners as well, like the poverty and how just abysmal like some of these places were, especially like in the pre-industrial kind of, or right around the Industrial Revolution, I guess, when that early 20th century. So in the wake of the 20th century, with kind of like all these different like changes and but yeah, there's Joyce had ended up wanting to exercise his creativity freely as an artist. He left Ireland and I believe went to various different European places. I think France and like Switzerland comes to mind. And I believe he died in Zurich, Switzerland. So that, but he keeps going back. Even, at middle age, he goes back to Dublin, like as a heart, because there's so much that he has to say about the place. And I don't think that's being like stuck in the past, or being, because I think there is a lot to say about the city. I mean, to write something that big about those many pages, like, and it's plays with styles too. There's one part of it that's more like a obliquely kind of removed, almost like omnipresent narrator, kind of in the sense that like Dostoevsky, kind of peering into multiple different points of view, like a polyphonic kind of novel. And then there's another part of it that's like less ghostly, but like more that actually takes on like the format of a play drama. Like it's a playwright type of script with like each character's. I could probably find that for you. Yeah, there's like you can see right here, like how well you can actually see that, but there's a lot of like private Compton and Sissy Cafe. Yes, I've sort of the Yorkshire relish for dance stands and orange lodges. Get down and push. So it's very kind of eccentric. I think the reason this is so hard for people isn't just the length, although it is that, but it's attributable to the sundry styles it goes through. It's like 1 second you're in this person's point of view, and then the other, it jumps forth. It's hermetic. It's like mercurial in the best way possible. And stream of conscious modernity is another thing that, obviously that's probably the first thing I should have mentioned about him, is that Joyce was a part of the, I don't know how much he knew it at the time, probably by the time he published Ulysses, but yeah, he was definitely among the ranks of modernists like D.H. Lawrence, Virginia Woolf, and Marcel Proust, and he, although, yeah, he was kind of doing his own thing. I guess Finnegan's Wake, too, is his, I've yet to actually read that, but I think Stephen Dedalus might show up in that as well, as a kind of reoccurring character that kind of goes travels through different narratives, and seems to be kind of a partially semi-inspired by Joyce's own life, is what I found. Probably the less, the more intellectual kind of scholarly aspect of him. But yeah, there's, this is why people, they say some parts of this are maddening, because there's so many different voices, and at some point, like, it takes on the point of view of Molly Bloom, like Leopold Bloom's wife, and there's a big, spoiler alert, question to later on in the novel about an affair, like whether or not she, I think Leopold Bloom is thinking about having an affair, but like and then it's showing like Molly is like waiting home for him, and it's like then it goes into her point of view, and it's like, and like is very privy and expressive, and emphasizes, or not really emphasizes, but in a kind of therapeutic way, but like more in a therapeutic, but more in a just kind of like a lens of just kind of going around kind of dispassionately is probably the right word, I should be looking for. That it's just looking at all these different kinds of points of view and weighing them against each other, and it's like, and then this happens, and then, oh, well, let's see, it's happening over here in Ireland, and it goes down the streets, and it's showing that too, why I think Joyce gets kind of lumped in with the modernists, not to use a heavy word like lumped as if it's like a bad thing that he's lumped in with them, but I think the reason he is because, and forgive me if I'm not showing this because this is actually a heavy book, so my weak arms cannot carry it for that long, but, and I'm also used to kind of sitting too, so I'm like standing up, so it's like kind of a little bit awkward, but, anyway, so, stream of consciousness, going back, and I think maybe it is fitting that I'm kind of saying all this in a kind of stream of conscious kind of way, because I am having some trouble, like, the details, and to be fair, there aren't, like, thematic details of, like, this happens, and then it's a hero's journey. In a sense, there is, and it kind of maybe, in one respect, you could actually say that it maybe lampoons that idea of, like, you know, having to call to action and having to, you know, have a healthy 3-act structure and, like, a coming of, you know, into one's own and, you know, informative and all that stuff, and it really does, in some sense, you know, there are quite a bit of lengthy discussions, and I think that another thing with the whole infidelity thing that reminded me a bit of, like, D.H. Lawrence, too, is that the fact that it's showing that there's so many different permutations of possibilities and events that are totally capable of, like, happening or not happening at any given time. It's like the fact that if Leopold Bloom did follow through with it, you know, Molly Bloom was, like, in the know anyway, so it's, like, kind of, like, part of it, but in the same sense that when Madame Bovary, Madame Bovary too, but actually I was thinking of coming more to mind of Lady Chatterley's lover, like, just like with Chatterley, if she could have stayed with her husband and just, like, been, okay, I'm just going to be kind of more this kind of upper class elitist British, you know, higher, you know, we're well-to-do, and I could have just clung with him, and I could have had safety and security, which I do have, but I'm also miserable because at heart I'm a free spirit, and, like, what I really want to do is just to, like, you know, like, make, like, just, like, complete, you know, like, just have, you know, a crazy romantic intimate sex with this gardener of mine, but there's all these different things, 'cause it's like, and that it's showing that D.H. Lawrence isn't, like, celebrating her decisions. He's not saying, like, oh, yay, infidelity, but it's, like, more so realistic, like, okay, well, this is probably what she might be thinking, and, like, what, you know, but it's also empathetic to, like, the husband situation, too, like, he was in tears, and how much he really did love, you know, Lady Chatterley, too. Like, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of black and white narrative. There's just completely different, and this is what's happening in Ulysses, is that there's so many different, like I said, hermetic jumping back and forth between different points of view and styles and narratives, and I think the main thing is with Stephen Dedalus is that it starts off in the novel here, with them in this thing that they keep calling it, this structure they refer to as nothing, I think, simply as the tower. I think they, I think it's like the first sentence, stately, plump, this is the first sentence, stately, plump, Buck Mulligan came to the stairhead bearing a bowl of lather on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed. A yellow dressing gown, ungirdled and was sustained gently behind him on the mild morning air. He had a bowl aloft and intoned. In triabo alto J, so a Latin, probably, incantation of some sort, maybe Catholic Mass, maybe. Halted, he peered down the dark wind. You can see Joyce can't escape Catholicism, the grip of its things. Halted, he peered down the dark, winding stairs and called out coarsely, "Come up, Kinch, come up with your fearful Jesuit." He faced about the blessed gravely thrice the tower, and then the tower I mentioned, and the surrounding land and waking mountains. And I guessed at some point it was like some almost like a lighthouse kind of feature. But I don't know if I actually learned anything from walking around Dublin myself, but I think, and I know they did keep a good amount of those same old cobblestone streets and that patterned and the same things. They kept the spirit of the city like very much in the same way, from what I remember when I visited. And I think the tower could be, like a kind of like adjacent structure to something that, it's like brick. I think it's made out of brick, but it's not a lighthouse. The lighthouses are, Dublin's not too far from the coast. I think there's like some like branching out kind of estuaries of different rivers and stuff that come from the coast, but it's not directly on the coast. I think it's like the coast is like a little bit a ways away. And yeah, there's like a lot interesting kind of thing with Dublin is that there's a lot of things to do with anti-Semitism, which is probably not too far from what was going on early 1900s. A lot of, especially with France, and Alfred Dreyfus comes to mind too with his, I'm not sure if I brought this up, but yeah, he was put on trial, and it was later found out that he was convicted of something, not larceny or something, but it was something pretty serious, like a pretty severe crime that you don't just like willy-nilly convict someone of, like it was like career destroying kind of, and he was an officer, I believe, Jewish, and they basically convicted him of something without any evidence, and it was later revealed that it was basically an anti-Semitic scheme, a conspiracy, basically, and that's one rare instance where the word conspiracy actually makes sense, and there's actually some ground to it, because it was like, literally there was no evidence to make pointing towards this guy as doing what he was accused of. So basically that's kind of set the ground for, I want to say that was like 1899, 1900, and that was probably, in a sense, because, writing from the point of view of Leopold Bloom, who is and you get like a lot of his kind of feelings and doubts and insecurities walking through Dublin, and various anti-Semitic things that it's said to him, and and you basically get kind of the sense that anti-Semitism is still alive and well in not only the rest of the world, but also Dublin as well. So there's partially could be a Catholic kind of thing to that too, like a kind of edgy Catholic kind of, like the same kind of in Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man as well. So yeah, there's, and then you get Stephen Dedalus, who is a let's check and see if it's still on here. Okay, thanks, apologies. Then you get Stephen Dedalus, who obviously is a takes his name from Daedalus, from the one who Greek myth of the man who designed the labyrinth. I don't think he was immortal, or I don't think he was like wholly immortal. Although some of these you get like kind of cryptid, half-breed, kind of half man, half god kind of characters. I'm not sure exactly what the technical term for that is, but yeah, Stephen Dedalus. He designed not only the labyrinth, but I think he also did, I think his Icarus, I think it was his son, I think. And Icarus was obviously the classic, everybody knows about, like the man who flew too close to the sun, and classic Greek pride, and there's another word, hubris is like another word. That is the word, probably, excuse me. I should have pointed out I am a bit under the weather, so my voice is obviously lower than usual, and I have a bit of a sore throat, so I'm extra kind of hydrated. So anyway, so that obviously takes from the myth of Stephen Dedalus, and his name kind of is, everything here is like basically a Greek, Greco-Roman, Hellenistic throwback. Even the name Ulysses is a shot, it's like, to the OG himself, like Odysseus / Ulysses. I guess the Romanized version was Ulysses, and obviously from the the epic poet Homer. So you get a lot of kind of classical kind of throwbacks to antiquity, and rightly so, because the character of Stephen Dallas is a scholar himself who's constantly just kind of shouting, kind of, excuse me, like, not obnoxious about it, but he's constantly kind of erudite and kind of showering people with his wisdom and thought. And probably one of my favorite quotes by him is like there's a conversation he has kind of early on in the novel where he's talking to his one of his friends, or maybe just a kind of casual acquaintance, and maybe they're meeting over dinner, I believe, or maybe it's earlier in the day and they're meeting for breakfast. But either way, they have a tidbit of their conversation is like about history, and he's like, all of us should try to learn from history, and this guy's kind of more taking from a point of view of like looking backwards, and but then Daedalus says like something to the effect of like, my dear sir, history is a nightmare of which I'm trying to awake from, which really stuck with me, because I think that really is like, there are some Nietzschean kind of almost parallels here to, I guess, this idea of like history, like everybody wanting to so hard, even Daedalus himself, as a scholar, kind of, he's teaching, like almost like not philology, but it's like definitely involves a lot of Greek and Roman classics and throughout history as well. But their job is to kind of preserve and to harken back to history like a lot. And but Daedalus, I guess, is in saying that history is a nightmare, is like because history is so full of, if think about it, is so full of tragedy, and this was even before the 20th century got so out of hand with like, I guess right at the time that was probably like not too, in recent past was probably like the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, and but I guess there were tons of other just like unrest, civil unrest, lots of countries, Spain at the time too, I know, had some. Germany obviously was going through lots of crap, but you could imagine kind of maybe at this point Joyce himself kind of having a third's eye kind of view from the outside in of like looking at the world maybe, but not only that, but also kind of being in these countries himself and kind of feeling, because he was obviously he went to Europe too, so there's my guess is that he got a good look of it at the time, and how maybe he was swelling and with tremors and like unrest and doubt, and a lot of people's identity were they didn't really know what to think of themselves at the time. So that my guess is that Daedalus was like pointing out that history wasn't as respectable, a tradition. It's like something that he doesn't even want to think about, because it's something like but he can't help but, the nightmare of which he's trying to awake is also very telling, because it's also something he is insinuating that he cannot escape. Like, he can't just leap out of this thing of history. It's like we're all taking part of it, whether you like it or not. Like this, maybe not in a drastic kind of way of like, I am on the front line and I'm helping, like either ease conflicts or accelerate them, or if you're a Napoleonic type who wants to go out and seize land and basically transcend the classic kind of become the great man, I guess, that kind of Nietzschean types, people who don't quite understand and misinterpret Nietzsche as his reassessment of all values, of like being like, well, that I guess the conclusion we should draw is to become great men and seize countries and responsibly, kill responsibly. But that's not what Nietzsche talks about. He says also to be responsibility, and that the death of God obviously wasn't something to be praised and to be honored. Like, we should be scared and we should be frightful, because that was the very backbone, kind of crux of what the very zenith of what everything we rested on for so long, the ritual, and we still need that kind of glue of ritual too. But then sometimes that glue gets too toxic and too cloistered, and you get mass hysteria. You get the classic Inquisition. You get Salem witch trials. You get just hunting down people and just bloodlust. You get this, mania. And I think, yeah, but and I think too that there's it's very hard to find that balance of the collective versus the identity. I think this is what the book goes into too, though I can't really recall the exact details, but it's just this idea of these are three people who, and it shows the timeline too, how the timeline plays against each other, which I love too, is the fact that I think partway through, Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus actually don't know each other. I don't think intimately yet. They're strangers, so you get these two classic modernism type of thing. You have Virginia Woolf, who has, hearing about, I think I've semi-recently reviewed this, but, hearing about, Septimus Warren Smith, as Mrs. Dalloway hears about him, and he's like, oh, they don't meet, but it's just, interesting. Same thing with this, they don't actually meet until, well into, I think, the afternoon, so, kind of almost halfway through the novel, maybe, I think. But yeah, it's just interesting because, and when they do meet, it's kind of they don't know what to think of each other, and it's kind of an interesting kind of dynamic because you had a very intimate look into both their lives beforehand, but now you're seeing each other through a different lens. Now you're seeing them through their own personal subjective lens of how they digest, and they're thinking about, maybe they're not entirely admirable, they don't really admire one another's foibles too much, or maybe Leopold Bloom thinks Dedalus is too much of a kind of an intellectual kind of snob, too arrogant and erudite for his taste, but and maybe he thinks that Leopold Bloom is maybe too kind of wasteful with his time, and maybe there's these different things, we have impressions about each other when we first meet. So I thought that was very interesting. So yeah, further on in Ulysses, it gets more and more, not out of hand, but it gets more jumpy and kind of a back and forth. Chaotic is a good word, I think, because there's scenes near the dock where I can't remember if it was Bloom starts, there's also, a lot of kind of tension toward politicians too, just mistrust of politicians too, because of how Dubliners, Joyce talked about this too, of just being kind of dissatisfied and disillusioned with all these different kind of goody two-shoe people who presented themselves as really trying to ameliorate and fix the issues of Irish, of Dublin, and but they kept they just kept time and time again they wouldn't be able to fix it. They just kind of kept left a veil of broken promises. So there's lots of that kind of attitude of and some pretty the style is chameleon-esque, chameleon-like. There's lots of literary references too, he keeps bringing up, I think, the life and opinions of Tristram Shandy as kind of a Anglo-Saxon kind of book of a good instance, almost the go-to kind of thing of the novel of I guess kind of the novel as a form of social commentary, or in the same sense that Candide by Voltaire was also kind of poking fun at how the Enlightenment values weren't always so good. To be a Pangloss wasn't always there. let's go back a little bit further, just to give a little bit of background. So she says, I put the rose in my hair like the Andalusian girls or shall, and I wear red, yes, and I guess Andalusia is that near Spain? I think is it a part near Spain? I think Andalusia is like a region, but it's not like a nationality. It's not like a country, but it's like a part where there's like mountains. I think in Europe near Spain, maybe France. So, I could be wrong though. I mean, or yes, and in my hair like a girl's flowers do, and used I shall wear a red, yes, and how he kissed me under the Moorish wall, and I thought well of him as another, and then I also asked him with my eyes again, like asked him with my eyes. This is an interesting way of putting it. To ask again, yes, and he asked me, would I yes to say yes, my mountain flower, and first put my arms around him and drew him out to me so he could feel my breasts all perfume, yes, and his heart was going to mad, and I said, yes, I will. So, yeah, you go back to the kind of core of, like, that defining passion that she's... Because when you're in a moment when you're, like, thinking about a marriage that might not be going so well, which is, let's be honest, like, probably a lot, more than we'd like to admit it, but you think of all these different contrasting, almost contradictory things, like, there's completely... Like, you could have both emphatic, like, just a personal fervor and, like, and adoration for somebody, very deep, profound adoration, yet at the same time also be feeling like complete, like malice and like just hatred towards the person too, and like just a want to move away because after being that close to anybody for that long. So you get like that very undiluted look into that kind of like a married life, and yeah, I should have also pointed too that there are interesting that I don't think the chapter headings or the sections aren't really chapters, but I don't think those are actually titled here, but I think there's different, so there's 17, I believe, parts of the novel. Episode 1, they're divided into episode, according to an online coordinates, because I'm actually not really sure if I see anything that you get, kind of a different kind of warning saying that, like, how it's going to kind of be, but, anyway, but yeah, there's, episode 1 is Telemachus, which I guess just, refers to another kind of Greek, mythology, I guess, too, and another one is episode 2, Nestor, again, a mythological kind of thing, alluding to probably Homer, I suppose, that's where Stephen starts, like, teaching his class. Forgot to mention, too, like, Stephen Douglas is a teacher as well, he's teaching, I believe, about, not Philo the Nihilist, or Pyrrho, or I think he might be teaching about, some Greek figure. And then there's episode 3, Proteus. Obviously, Proteus was the Greek god of the waters, like the old kind of man ruling over the bodies of water and oceans and seas, and thus the name Protean too, which I've really liked using that word to kind of be like, ooh, Protean. We'll see if I throw people off, see if they get that kind of reference. But Protean just means like kind of like as a bodies of water tend to do, kind of not like strict direction, not linear, but non-linear, and kind of subject to change is a good word. I think that's probably the dictionary definition if you look up Protean too. But yeah, don't quote me on that. Episode 4 is Calypso. Obviously Calypso is another mythological. All of these are going to be, but episode 5 is the Lotus Eaters. Again, like the Lotus Eaters of. I actually can't remember if that was. These people cursed to an island to eat lotuses. That's what it was. Okay, so 6 is Hades. 7 is Aetolius. There's the Laestri Journeys. I'm not sure. Laestri Jononians. And then the Wandering Rocks is number 10. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped to number 9. Scylla and Charybdis. And then the Sirens, obviously no explanation needed. Episode 12 is the Cyclops, and then 13, Nausicaa. Episode 14, Oxen in the Sun. And then episode 15 is Circe. And then it's actually separated into, I believe, 3 parts. And then episode 16 is Eumaeus, or Eumaeus. And then 17 is Ithaca. And the last final chapter is number 18, Penelope. So, I think that is all I have for Ulysses by James Joyce. Definitely a lot to unpack there. Definitely requires a reread down the line, but it is a book that you have to kind of read in the right way, to go into it with knowing certain things first and being like, okay, well, I'm not going to try to read this in the same exact way that I'm going to read, let's say, a historical kind of gesture, like a historical kind of dissertation or take on, like, or maybe a philosophical kind of work either, because those are obviously going to contrast highly with these, with a novel, especially an unconventional kind of modernist novel. And yeah, so I think that's all I have for today for Ulysses by James Joyce, and I would like to do another one about 100 books I read in 2021, because I think that was when I actually managed to force myself to read 100 books. And yeah, I'll try to give a little bit of like a takeaway I had from those books too. So yeah, thanks for watching again, and I'll see you in the next one.